The first thing I noticed was that the room had gone completely silent. Not quiet. Silent. The kind of silence that makes you aware of every small sound you normally ignore. The ticking of a wall clock, the hum of an air conditioner, the scrape of a shoe against polished hardwood. I was standing near the back patio of my neighbor's house, holding a paper cup of coffee that had already gone cold, when a man in a dark blue suit walked past 23 guests without acknowledging any of them. He wasn't looking at the expensive cars parked outside. He wasn't looking at the people gathered around the outdoor bar. He was looking for someone. Specifically, he was looking for me. When his eyes finally found mine, he smiled, crossed the yard and extended his hand. Mr. Carter. For a second, I thought he had mistaken me for somebody else. Yes, I said. His smile widened. I've been trying to find you for almost 20 minutes. Around us, conversation stopped. I could actually see heads turning. People were watching, including my neighbor. Especially my neighbor. The same man who had spent years telling anyone who would listen that I was a failure. The same man who said my children would never become anything important. The same man who believed money could predict the future. The man stared at me now with visible confusion. The suited stranger continued. Your son and daughter asked me to personally thank you before tonight's announcement. I felt my grip tighten around the coffee cup. Not because I was surprised. Because I suddenly understood exactly what was about to happen. Across the patio, my neighbor's confident smile disappeared. And for the first time in nearly 20 years, he looked uncertain. But this story does not start here. Welcome back to Revenge Cold Stories. Drop your first name and your city in the comments and subscribe before we go any further. My name is Daniel Carter. I'm 62 years old. I have 2 children. And for most of my adult life, people assumed I had failed them. Not because they were unhappy. Not because they struggled in school. Not because they lacked character. People assumed I had failed because I didn't have money. At least not the kind of money that impresses strangers. I spent 37 years working as a maintenance technician for the county transportation department. My highest annual salary was $71,400. My average salary was closer to $58,000. I drove used vehicles. I repaired things instead of replacing them. I tracked grocery prices. I clipped coupons. I bought school supplies during August clearance sales. By the standards of my neighborhood, I was ordinary. Painfully ordinary. My neighbor, Richard Langley, was not. Richard was 70 when the events of this story began to come full circle. He owned multiple commercial properties. He lived in a 6-bedroom home valued at over $2 million. He drove luxury vehicles that cost more than my yearly income. People listened when Richard spoke. Not because he was wise. Because he was wealthy. And in many communities, people often confuse those two things. The strange part is that Richard wasn't always cruel. That's important. Stories become too simple when villains are painted in black and heroes in white. Life doesn't work that way. Richard genuinely believed he understood how the world worked. He believed success followed money. He believed opportunities followed money. He believed confidence followed money. And because of that, he believed children raised without significant wealth started life already behind. To him, it wasn't an insult. It was a fact. Or at least what he considered a fact. That belief shaped everything he said to me over the years. But before I explain Richard, I need to explain my children. Because they were the center of everything. My son Ethan was 8 years old when his mother left. My daughter Lily was 5. I was 39. One ordinary Tuesday morning, my entire future changed. No dramatic fight. No screaming match. No broken dishes. Just a quiet conversation at our kitchen table. Sometimes the most devastating moments arrive without any theatrical warning. I still remember the sunlight coming through the blinds. I still remember the smell of coffee. And I still remember realizing that from that day forward, every decision would be mine alone. For the next 13 years, I was a single father. No backup plans. No safety net. No second income. Just me. And 2 children who needed stability more than they needed perfection. The challenge wasn't providing food. It wasn't paying bills. It wasn't surviving financially. The hardest part was carrying responsibility every hour of every day. If Ethan struggled, it was on me. If Lily cried at night, it was on me. If something went wrong, there was nobody else to blame. Nobody else to help. Nobody else to absorb part of the weight. Just me. And yet, looking back now, those years remain the most meaningful years of my life. Not because they were easy. Because they mattered. Every school project. Every soccer practice. Every science fair. Every parent-teacher conference. Every late-night conversation. Every moment mattered. I didn't know it then. But those ordinary days were quietly building something extraordinary. The first lesson I learned as a single parent was that children notice everything. Not just what you say. What you do. The promises you keep. The promises you break. The expressions you wear when you think nobody is watching. Ethan noticed when I stayed up late balancing bills at the kitchen table. Lily noticed when I skipped buying myself something because she needed new shoes. Neither of them said anything. Children rarely do. But they see more than adults realize. Our house wasn't impressive. It was a 3-bedroom ranch home built in 1978. The roof needed repairs twice during the years I lived there. The water heater failed when Ethan was 11. The kitchen cabinets were older than both of my children combined. Nothing about it looked successful. Nothing about it impressed visitors. But it was ours. Every mortgage payment represented another month of security. Every repaired appliance represented another expense avoided. Every sacrifice represented another opportunity for my children. When Ethan was 10, his teacher called me into school. Any parent knows that feeling. You sit down expecting bad news. Instead, she slid a stack of papers across her desk. Math tests. Perfect scores. Every single one. He finishes before everyone else, she told me. I looked at Ethan. He stared at the floor. Embarrassed. Not proud. Embarrassed. That was Ethan. Quiet intelligence. The kind that doesn't need attention. The kind that often gets overlooked because it doesn't advertise itself. What do you want to be someday? I asked him on the drive home. He thought for a moment. I don't know. What do you like? He looked out the window. Figuring things out. At the time, it sounded like a child's answer. Years later, I would realize it described his entire future. Lily was different. Completely different. Where Ethan observed, Lily engaged. Where Ethan listened, Lily questioned. Where Ethan studied quietly, Lily challenged assumptions. At 7 years old, she once spent 3 days arguing with a school textbook because she believed one of its examples was misleading. 3 days. Most adults won't spend 3 minutes questioning information. Lily built an entire case. Charts, notes, highlighted passages. Eventually, her teacher admitted she had a point. That was Lily. Persistent, curious, relentless. The type of person who keeps pulling on a thread until the entire sweater comes apart. Raising them required different approaches. Ethan needed confidence. Lily needed direction. One needed encouragement to speak. The other needed reminders to listen. Parenting wasn't about treating them equally. It was about giving each child what they specifically needed. Meanwhile, life continued moving forward. Slowly, steadily, Paycheck after paycheck. Year after year. And eventually, Richard Langley entered the picture. The first time we met, he had just purchased the large property next door. Moving trucks arrived for 3 consecutive days. Contractors worked for nearly 6 months. Landscapers transformed the yard into something that looked more like a resort than a residence. The finished property included a pool, outdoor kitchen, guest house and 4-car garage. The garage alone was larger than my first apartment. When we were formally introduced, Richard seemed friendly enough. Confident, polished, successful. The kind of man who remembered names instantly and maintained eye contact while speaking. He asked questions, listened carefully, laughed easily. For the first few months we got along well. Then one evening everything changed. Not dramatically, subtly, which is often how these things happen. I was repairing a loose fence panel between our properties. Richard walked over carrying a glass of wine. We talked for several minutes. Eventually, the conversation shifted toward children. He asked about Ethan and Lily. I told him about school. Their interests. Their goals. The normal things parents discuss. Then he asked a question. One simple question. Have you started investment accounts for them? I shook my head. No. His eyebrows lifted slightly. What about trust funds? I laughed. No trust funds either. He smiled politely. But something changed in his expression. Not judgment. Calculation. As if he had suddenly adjusted his expectations. That's unfortunate, he said. What is the advantage? I didn't understand. The advantage. He nodded. Money gives children options. I agreed. Of course it did. Then he continued. Children without financial advantages spend years catching up. The statement wasn't aggressive. It wasn't even rude. But it stayed with me. Because of how confidently he said it. Like gravity. Like weather. Like an unavoidable law of nature. I shrugged. They'll find their own paths. He smiled. A small smile. The kind adults use when they think someone is being unrealistic. Hopefully. Hopefully. One word. Nothing more. But that was the beginning. Over time, comments like that became common. Never direct enough to start an argument. Never harsh enough to create a scene. Just consistent. A steady drip of assumptions. One summer afternoon, Ethan was helping me repair the deck. He was 14. Sweaty. Covered in sawdust. Working harder than many adults. Richard happened to walk by. He watched Ethan for a moment. Then smiled. Good work ethic. I thanked him. Then came the follow-up. It'll serve him well. I nodded. Richard looked at Ethan. Especially since he'll probably need scholarships. The words landed harder than he intended. Or perhaps exactly as intended. I couldn't tell. Ethan heard them. I knew because his hammer stopped moving. Just briefly. Then he continued working. Richard kept talking. Unaware. Or unconcerned. I'm always telling people the same thing. If you don't start with money, you compensate with effort. Compensate. The word bothered me. As though effort existed merely to offset some deficiency. As though hard work were a substitute prize. After Richard left, Ethan kept hammering boards for several minutes. Finally, he asked a question. Do rich people think they're better than everyone else? I considered my answer carefully. Some do. And some don't. Exactly. He nodded. Then returned to work. That conversation stayed with me because of what he didn't ask. He didn't ask whether Richard was right. He didn't ask whether he was disadvantaged. He didn't ask whether life would be harder. He already knew. Children understand reality. They don't need adults pretending otherwise. The question he asked was about value. Whether money changed a person's worth. That was what concerned him. Not opportunity. Worth. A few years later, Lily experienced something similar. She was 15. One of the top students in her class. A debate champion. An honor roll student. A girl who read college-level material for fun. Richard attended a neighborhood barbecue. The conversation turned toward universities. Someone asked Lily where she hoped to attend. She mentioned several schools. Ambitious schools. Competitive schools. The adults smiled politely. Then Richard chuckled. Not cruelly. Almost casually. Those places cost a fortune. Lily nodded. I know. Well, Richard said, taking a sip of his drink, dreams are important. The table grew quiet. I saw exactly what happened. Everyone understood the implication. Dreams. Not plans. Not goals. Dreams. The distinction mattered. Lily smiled. A calm smile. Then she replied. Scholarships exist. Richard laughed lightly. They do. He paused. But competition is fierce. Lily's smile never changed. Then I'll compete. The conversation moved on. But several people looked impressed. Including me. Not because of what she said. Because of how she said it. No anger. No defensiveness. Just certainty. The certainty of someone who trusted her own effort more than someone else's assumptions. That confidence would become important later. Very important. As the years passed, I gradually learned more about Richard's background. Understanding him didn't excuse his behavior. But it explained it. Richard grew up poor. Much poorer than I did. His father worked multiple jobs. His mother cleaned offices at night. By every measurable standard, Richard earned his success. Nobody handed him anything. Nobody rescued him. Nobody opened doors. He built a business from almost nothing. Expanded it. Protected it. Multiplied it. The problem was that his success taught him two contradictory lessons. The first lesson was true. Hard work matters. The second lesson was dangerous. Success proves superiority. Without realizing it, Richard had started confusing achievement with identity. If successful people succeeded because they were smarter, better, stronger, then failure must reflect the opposite. Life felt orderly that way. Predictable. Comforting. But reality isn't orderly. Reality contains luck. Timing. Relationships. Health. Accidents. Circumstances. Variables nobody controls. The older I became, the more I understood that success often depends on factors beyond effort alone. Yet Richard resisted that idea. He needed the world to make sense. And in his version of the world, money was evidence. Evidence of value. Evidence of intelligence. Evidence of future outcomes. Which is why he kept underestimating my children. He wasn't trying to hurt them. He genuinely believed he could predict them. That was the mistake. Because the future has a habit of embarrassing people who think they already know how it ends. The strange thing about predictions is that people remember the ones that come true and quietly forget the ones that don't. Richard made predictions constantly. About housing markets, politics, business trends, professional sports, neighborhood developments. Most were reasonable. Some were surprisingly accurate. And because he was often right, people gradually stopped questioning the times he was wrong. That happens more than most people realize. Confidence creates its own credibility, especially when it's attached to wealth. By the time Ethan entered his senior year of high school, Richard had become one of those people whose opinions carried weight before he even spoke. At neighborhood gatherings, conversations often shifted toward him naturally. Someone would ask what he thought. Someone else would listen. Then another person would agree. The cycle repeated itself. I never disliked him. Not entirely. Frustrated by him. Often. Angry at him. Sometimes. But dislike requires simplicity. And Richard wasn't simple. He occasionally helped neighbors without expecting recognition. He donated to local charities. He paid for repairs when a storm damaged part of a community park. When Mrs. Alvarez, 3 houses down, lost her husband unexpectedly, Richard arranged meals for her family for nearly a month. People contain contradictions. Richard certainly did. The same man who could show genuine generosity could also look at a teenager and see a limitation instead of potential. The same man who admired hard work could underestimate people who hadn't yet received public recognition. Human beings rarely fit into clean categories. That complexity mattered. Because when everything eventually changed, it wasn't a battle between good and evil. It was a collision between assumptions and reality. Ethan graduated near the top of his class. Not first, not second, fourth, out of 412 students. I remember the exact number because he pretended not to care. Then spent 2 days quietly checking university acceptance portals every few hours. He received several offers. Good offers, strong offers, but the one that changed everything arrived on a rainy Thursday afternoon. I came home from work around 5:40 p.m. The house was unusually quiet. Lily sat at the kitchen table grinning. Ethan stood frozen near the computer. He looked pale. For a moment I thought something was wrong. Then Lily pointed at the screen. Tell him. Ethan looked at me. Still stunned. I got it. What? The scholarship. I walked closer. My eyes moved across the email. Then I read it again. Then a third time. Full tuition. Academic scholarship. One of the best engineering programs in the country. For several seconds nobody spoke. Then Lily screamed. Actually screamed. The kind of celebration usually reserved for championship victories. Ethan laughed. I laughed. Lily nearly knocked over a chair. It was one of those moments parents remember forever. Not because of the scholarship itself. Because of what it represented. Years of studying. Years of discipline. Years of saying no when distractions said yes. Years of effort becoming visible. The next weekend, Richard heard the news. Word traveled quickly through the neighborhood. He congratulated Ethan. Genuinely. I could tell he meant it. Then came the familiar qualifier. Excellent opportunity. Ethan thanked him. Richard nodded. Now the hard part begins. Again, not rude. Not openly dismissive. Just subtly predictive. As though success remained temporary until proven otherwise. As though every achievement required a footnote. I watched Ethan's reaction carefully. Nothing. No irritation. No frustration. No insecurity. Just a polite smile. That was the first time I noticed something changing. When Ethan was younger, comments like Richard's lingered. Now they seemed to pass straight through him. He no longer needed validation. That realization struck me harder than I expected. Parents spend years trying to protect children from criticism. Eventually, you understand the real goal isn't protection. It's resilience. You can't remove every negative voice. You prepare your children to survive them. And Ethan was beginning to do exactly that. College changed him. Not dramatically. Gradually. Each semester added another layer of confidence. He became more comfortable speaking. More comfortable leading. More comfortable trusting his own judgment. During his second year, he joined a research team. During his third year, he helped develop a project that attracted attention from several major companies. During his fourth year, recruiters began contacting him directly. Meanwhile, Lily was creating her. By the time I turned 61, I had developed a habit that surprised people. I stopped keeping track of accomplishments. Not because I wasn't proud of Ethan and Lily. Quite the opposite. There were simply too many milestones. Too many moments. Too many achievements. At some point, trying to catalogue everything became impossible. The first promotion was easy to remember. The second too. The third required checking old messages. After that, events began overlapping. Projects, awards, leadership roles, recognition, interviews, partnerships, new responsibilities, new opportunities. Life accelerated. And while their professional lives expanded, mine became smaller. Not worse. Smaller. Quieter. The children were grown. The house stayed clean longer. The refrigerator remained full. The phone rang less often, but carried more meaningful conversations. The frantic pace of parenting had been replaced by something gentler. Reflection. For decades, my purpose had been immediate. Get up. Work. Provide. Support. Repeat. Now I had space to think. That space brought perspective. And perspective brought gratitude. One winter evening, I sat alone in the living room looking through old photo albums. Not digital photos. Actual printed photographs. Bent corners. Faded colours. Handwritten notes on the back. Entire years preserved inside cardboard covers. I found a picture of Ethan at age 9. He was holding a homemade science project. The display board leaned sideways. The lettering wasn't perfectly aligned. But his smile filled the frame. A few pages later I found Lily. Age 7. Standing beside a stack of library books nearly half her height. Grinning proudly. I stared at those pictures for a long time. Then I started laughing. Not because anything was funny. Because of how obvious everything seemed in retrospect. The signs had always been there. The curiosity, the determination, the discipline, the persistence, all the qualities people later praised. All the qualities newspapers would eventually mention. All the qualities professionals would admire. They existed before anyone noticed. Before awards. Before titles. Before recognition. Success hadn't created those traits. Success had revealed them. That distinction mattered. A great deal. Around the same period, Richard became increasingly focused on legacy. He talked about it often. More than before. At neighborhood events. Community meetings. Private conversations. The subject kept returning. Legacy. Impact. Influence. What remains after you're gone? I understood why. Age changes priorities. The things that impress you at 40 often feel less important at 70. Accumulation eventually gives way to evaluation. People stop asking, "What have I gained?" They begin asking, "What have I built?" Richard was wrestling with that question, though I don't think he fully realized it. One afternoon, he invited several neighbors to tour renovations he had completed on his property. The gathering was informal. About 20 people attended. We walked through newly redesigned outdoor spaces. Expanded entertaining areas. A renovated guest house. Everything was beautiful. Truly beautiful. Richard had excellent taste. Even his critics admitted that. At one point, the group gathered near the pool. The conversation shifted toward family. Someone asked whether Brandon planned to take over more of Richard's business interests. Richard hesitated. Only briefly. But I noticed. Then he answered. We'll see. 3 simple words. Nothing unusual. Yet they carried uncertainty. The discussion moved on. Most people probably forgot the exchange immediately. I didn't. Because uncertainty looked unfamiliar on Richard. For decades he had projected confidence. Now small cracks occasionally appeared. Not dramatic cracks. Hairline fractures. Moments where reality resisted his expectations. Meanwhile, Ethan and Lily continued moving forward. Not perfectly. No one's life unfolds perfectly. There were disappointments. Projects that failed. Opportunities that disappeared. Applications that were rejected. Plans that changed. But setbacks never became identities. They became lessons. Temporary obstacles. Part of the process. That mindset made all the difference. Years earlier, Richard viewed financial advantage as the primary predictor of future outcomes. My children viewed adaptability as the primary predictor. Time was beginning to reveal which philosophy held greater value. Then came the invitation. The invitation that ultimately changed everything. It arrived on a Tuesday. Large cream-colored envelope. Heavy paper. Professional printing. Richard was hosting a major celebration at his home. Not a birthday. Not an anniversary. A legacy event. That was the phrase used in the invitation. A gathering designed to celebrate decades of business success, charitable contributions, and community involvement. The guest list was impressive. Business owners, local officials, organization leaders, community leaders, former colleagues, influential people from across the region. Several neighbors joked that it sounded more like a corporate gala than a backyard event. They weren't entirely wrong. My first instinct was not to attend. Large gatherings had never been my favorite thing. But Richard personally encouraged me. You're coming. It sounded less like a request than a decision. I laughed. We'll see. He pointed at me. No. Then he smiled. You're coming. I eventually agreed. Partly out of courtesy. Partly out of curiosity. I had no idea the evening would become one of the most memorable nights of my life. The day arrived in early spring. Clear skies. Comfortable temperature. Perfect weather. By the time I walked next door, luxury vehicles already lined both sides of the street. Valets directed traffic. Catering staff moved efficiently through the property. String lights illuminated walkways. Live music drifted across the yard. Everything looked flawless. Richard loved preparation. And it showed. I greeted familiar faces. Accepted a cup of coffee. Spent time speaking with neighbors. The atmosphere remained relaxed despite the impressive guest list. For the first hour, nothing unusual happened. Then the speeches began. Several guests spoke about Richard's accomplishments. Business growth. Community service. Economic development. Philanthropic efforts. Most of it was deserved. Richard had accomplished remarkable things. The audience applauded repeatedly. He looked proud. And honestly, he should have. Whatever disagreements I had with him, nobody could deny the effort behind his achievements. Eventually, Richard delivered his own remarks. The speech lasted around 15 minutes. Thoughtful, personal, reflective. People listened attentively. Several times he mentioned the importance of opportunity. The importance of preparation. The importance of creating advantages for future generations. Near the end, he said something that caught my attention. You build success not only for yourself but for those who come after you. The crowd applauded. Richard smiled. Then he continued. The greatest gift parents can provide is a stronger starting point. More applause. Reasonable statement. Mostly true. Then came the addition. The unnecessary addition. The world remains difficult enough. Why ask children to begin the race farther behind? The audience nodded. Many agreed. I understood the point. But I also felt familiar frustration. Because life isn't a race with a single starting line. People begin from different places. Travel different roads. Face different obstacles. Define success differently. Reducing everything to advantage misses too much. Still, I said nothing. There was no reason to. The evening wasn't about me. Or my children. Or old disagreements. At least not yet. After the speech, guests returned to conversations. Music resumed. Servers circulated through the crowd. The event continued. About 40 minutes later, something unusual happened. A black vehicle entered the driveway. Not unusual by itself. Many luxury vehicles had arrived earlier. This one was different because people noticed. Staff noticed. Guests noticed. Even Richard noticed. The atmosphere shifted slightly. Curiosity moved through the crowd. The vehicle stopped. A man stepped out. Mid-50s. Professional. Confident. Dark blue suit. Purposeful stride. Not the kind of person who wanders uncertainly through events. The kind who arrives knowing exactly why he's there. Richard immediately started moving toward him. Several others did too. Clearly he was expected. Or at least important. The newcomer exchanged brief greetings. Shook hands. Smiled politely. Then something strange happened. His attention drifted away from the welcoming group. He looked across the yard. Scanning faces. Searching. Richard spoke to him. The man responded. Then continued searching. Richard pointed toward various guests. The man shook his head. Still searching. I watched from near the back patio, mildly curious. Nothing more. I certainly wasn't concerned. Why would I be? The man didn't know me. I didn't know him. A few moments later he began walking. Past business owners. Past local officials. Past community leaders. Past several people who were clearly trying to introduce themselves. His eyes remained focused. Looking. Searching. The crowd gradually noticed. Conversations slowed. People turned. The man's path continued straight across the yard. Straight toward my side of the gathering. I glanced behind me. Maybe he was looking for someone else. Nobody. Just me. The possibility felt ridiculous. Then his expression changed. Recognition. He accelerated slightly. Suddenly my stomach tightened. Not from fear. From confusion. The man approached directly. Extended his hand. And asked a question that instantly transformed the entire evening. Mr. Daniel Carter. The surrounding conversation stopped. Completely. I looked at him. Then at the dozens of faces now watching. Yes. His smile widened immediately. Finally. Finally. Such a strange word. As though locating me had been important. As though I mattered to the purpose of his visit. The crowd remained silent. Waiting. Including Richard. Especially Richard. The man shook my hand firmly. I've been hoping to meet you. I blinked. I'm sorry, have we met before? No. He laughed softly. But I've heard about you for years. Years. Now I was even more confused. Around us, curiosity intensified. People exchanged glances. Nobody understood what was happening, including me. The man released my hand, then said something that caused several guests to visibly react. I'm here because of your son and your daughter. Every sound seemed to disappear. Richard's expression froze. My pulse quickened. The man continued smiling. And for the first time all evening, I had the unmistakable feeling that something significant was about to unfold. Something nobody there expected. Something that had been building for years without any of us fully realizing it. And whatever happened next, it was already clear that Richard's carefully planned celebration was no longer following the script he had imagined. For several seconds, nobody spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was expectant. The kind of silence that settles over a crowd when everyone senses they are about to witness something important. I looked at the man. He looked back at me, still smiling, still standing there as though finding me had completed a task he had been working toward all evening. Finally, I asked the obvious question. I'm sorry, but who are you? A few people laughed softly. The tension eased slightly. The man nodded. Fair question. He reached into his jacket pocket and handed me a business card. I glanced down, then looked again. The company name was familiar. Very familiar. Even I recognized it immediately. And I wasn't someone who followed business news closely. Several nearby guests leaned subtly forward, trying to read it, trying to understand. The man introduced himself. My name is Michael Reynolds. A few expressions changed instantly. Several people recognized the name. Others clearly did not. Richard recognized it. That much was obvious. His eyebrows lifted. Only slightly. But enough. Michael continued. I'm the executive chairman of the organization currently partnering with both of your children. Now even more people were listening. Every nearby conversation had completely stopped. The music still played somewhere in the background, but it felt distant. Almost irrelevant. I stared at him. Both of them. He nodded. Both. Then he laughed softly. Actually, that's one reason I've wanted to meet you. The crowd remained focused on every word. Michael glanced around briefly, as though suddenly realizing how many people were listening. Then he turned back toward me. I've spent the last 3 years hearing the same thing from 2 completely different people. I frowned. What thing? His smile widened. That whatever success they achieved started at home. I didn't know what to say. The compliment hit harder than I expected. Not because of the words themselves. Because of who was saying them. Michael wasn't a family friend. He wasn't a neighbor. He wasn't someone being polite. He was a man with no reason to exaggerate. And that gave the statement weight. The crowd stayed quiet. Listening. Watching. Trying to piece together a story they clearly didn't know. Michael continued. Your son mentions you constantly. I laughed. Hopefully not constantly. Oh, constantly. Several guests smiled. So does your daughter. That earned a few chuckles. Then Michael shook his head. No, seriously. His expression became more thoughtful. They speak about discipline the same way. Responsibility the same way. Integrity the same way. Failure the same way. He paused. And every time those conversations happen, your name eventually appears. I felt unexpectedly emotional. Not visibly. Not dramatically. But enough to make me look away for a moment. Parents spend years wondering whether lessons are being absorbed. Years wondering whether values are sticking. years wondering whether ordinary moments matter. Then one day evidence appears. Often when you least expect it. Michael wasn't complimenting achievements. He was describing character. And that mattered more. Much more. Nearby, Richard remained silent, watching carefully. His expression was difficult to read. Not hostile. Not defensive. Just attentive. Michael continued. I should probably explain why I'm here. That seemed like a good idea. Several people nodded. A few laughed. The crowd had effectively become an audience. The original purpose of the event had faded into the background. Nobody seemed interested in leaving. Michael gestured toward me. Your children are receiving recognition next month. A murmur moved through the crowd. Recognition. The word sounded important. Michael continued. A significant recognition. Maury silence. Then someone finally asked. What kind of recognition? The question came from somewhere behind us. Michael turned slightly. Then smiled. The kind that attracts national attention. Now people were definitely interested. I felt my heart beating faster. Not because of pride. Because I genuinely didn't know what he was talking about. Ethan and Lily shared accomplishments regularly. But neither enjoyed self-promotion. They often downplayed things. Sometimes dramatically. There had been multiple occasions where I discovered major achievements weeks later through someone else. Michael seemed to notice my confusion. You didn't know. It wasn't a question. I laughed. No, he laughed too. That sounds exactly like them. Maury Guest smiled. The atmosphere had become oddly warm. Comfortable. Human. Then Michael explained. And as he did, the entire evening changed. He spoke first about Ethan. About projects. Leadership initiatives. Innovations. Programs that had expanded far beyond their original scope. Work affecting thousands of people. Teams operating across multiple countries. Outcomes measurable not in profits alone, but in impact. Every few sentences someone in the crowd reacted. A surprised expression. A whispered comment. A raised eyebrow. Many people knew Ethan as the quiet boy who used to help me repair fences. Now they were hearing a very different description. Not because Ethan had changed. Because the scale had changed. Then Michael shifted to Lily. The reaction became even stronger. Research initiatives. Policy recommendations. Advisory roles. Collaborations. Programs influencing decisions at levels most people never see. The details accumulated steadily. Each one larger than the last. Each one making previous assumptions feel increasingly outdated. I glanced around. Faces reflected genuine surprise. Not envy. Not resentment. Surprise. People were recalibrating. Revising old impressions. Reconsidering what they thought they knew. And in the middle of all of it stood Richard. Listening. Quiet. Thoughtful. The same man who once viewed my children's futures through the lens of financial disadvantage. Now hearing respected professionals describe them as leaders. Not future leaders. Present leaders. The distinction mattered. Michael eventually finished summarizing their accomplishments. Then he said something that settled over the gathering like a final piece falling into place. The interesting thing is that neither of them talks much about awards. He shrugged. They talk about people. The crowd listened. Michael nodded toward me. They talk about teachers who encouraged them. Friends who helped them. Mentors who challenged them. And they talk about a father who never allowed circumstances to become excuses. Silence. Not awkward silence. Meaningful silence. The kind that follows something honest. I looked down briefly. Partly because I felt overwhelmed. Partly because I didn't know where else to look. When I finally glanced up, my eyes met Richard's. For a moment, neither of us looked away. And in that brief exchange, I saw something I had never seen before. Not disagreement. Not certainty. Humility. The realization surprised me. Because humility changes people. Sometimes slowly. Sometimes instantly. Michael checked his watch. Then laughed. I didn't mean to hijack the evening. Several people responded immediately. You didn't. Another voice added. Keep talking. Laughter spread through the crowd. Even Richard smiled. A genuine smile. Perhaps the first relaxed smile I'd seen from him all night. Michael shook his head. No, tonight isn't about me. Then he turned toward Richard. And honestly, it's not about me finding Mr. Carter either. Richard nodded politely. Michael continued. But I wanted to meet the man responsible for raising two remarkable people. The words hung in the air. Simple. Direct. Impossible to misunderstand. Years earlier, Richard had measured future success through resources. Now an accomplished outsider was publicly recognizing something entirely different. Character. Guidance. Consistency. Values. Things harder to quantify. Things impossible to purchase directly. The contrast wasn't dramatic. Nobody argued. Nobody confronted anyone. Nobody referenced old conversations. And yet the irony was unmistakable. The crowd felt it. I felt it. Richard certainly felt it. Because